Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome back, actually, um, my friend Kelsey Maeve, who was on my first interview series. Kelsey is a somatic, let me check, trauma recovery practitioner. Um, and she's super powerful, has super powerful healing tools that we've seen before. Kelsey, why don't you just start by telling everybody about your work, what you do, who you are, and then I know you've got some really interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Thanks for inviting me back. It's good to be in conversation. And I'm Kelsey, she, they pronouns, and I live in Northern California in occupied Huchin, otherwise known as Oakland, where I grew up, and now work mostly online, but I'm now getting back into in person work, which I'm really excited about. And the work that I do is very therapeutic and basically working with the nervous system and the body to resolve trauma that
Mm,
has been held in the body. And so I like to tell my clients, if you feel like your trauma is just this big burden, every single one-on-one session we do, it's like chipping away at that huge boulder, just like a little bit. And there are ways to actually digest and resolve those things so that they're no longer um, burdening you. And once you kind of get
mhm.
that backlog down a little bit lighter, you can actually feel a lot more capacity in your life for all the things, for joy, for grief, for action. And I think we'll get into some of that today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to silence my phone. Um, yeah, that's that's so powerful. Like trauma sticks, it's sticky, but that doesn't mean it has to be permanent.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely change and it shapes us, but it doesn't have to feel, your life doesn't have to feel so narrow and tight and constricted necessarily because of trauma.
Yeah. So speaking of burden, the topic here is the genocide in Gaza. And we were starting to talk, before we started recording about the heaviness that can come from even just being a witness from a distance to genocide. Like, I don't have anybody in Gaza who I know personally. I think some people on this call do, and many do not. So how can trauma come up as witnesses, and what's unique about being a witness?
Mm, yeah, well, this is just an incredible situation for those of us who are witnessing through a screen or through the news. We're witnessing a genocide happening on live stream, in real time, and we can see it. And there's really like nobody, it's become a global um, awareness, and so there's really, nobody who can say, "Oh, I didn't know," I
Mhm.
didn't know this was happening. And so, what do we do with that awareness? And then what do you do as a witness? And so, I wanted to read a quote from a Palestinian American journalist named Sarah Aziza, who wrote this article called The Work of the Witness.
Mm.
It was just published, and I wrote it down because I wanted to share it here. You
Can I
familiar?
just share what just came up for me when you were
Yeah.
sharing that? My father lost all his extended family in the Holocaust,
Mhm.
and they didn't know. Right. So many people didn't know until it was over what had happened. And there are many, many individual Gazans and Gazan families who are out of communication. And I hear from people who have family there that they don't know if they've lost everyone
Mhm.
or how many people they've lost. And
Mhm.
it's not over. But it's so different knowing than the behind closed doors experiences of the past.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. I'm curious what feels different about it to you.
Yeah, I realized I'm not sure. It's like, well, I mean, one thing is you can't find refuge in denial.
Mhm.
And it just makes even the contrast somehow brings up a similarity. Like the finding out all at once is a special kind of tragedy. The finding out over and over and over and it's still not stopping is another kind of tragedy.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's finding out over and over and over, and it's still not stopping. Like we could, it's January now, and so it's been months, and we could never see another photo or video, and still we would know.
Yeah.
And yet, the people who are, sharing their photos and the videos and reporting from the ground and writing like their own poems and obituaries, like,
Putting
expecting,
their eulogies in advance. Yeah.
yeah, it's, we have seen it over and over and over again. And I think that amount of input for someone who is, physically, maybe emotionally more distant can be so overwhelming that the nervous system can go into a lot of different responses. And for someone who is more closely connected, who might have family there, um, also might have a different type of set of nervous system responses, right? We're all unique. And um, I think this quote,
Yeah.
because it's not like, oh, how can we, bear witness and be okay? Or like, how can we bear witness and feel okay about this? Because it's not okay.
We're never going to feel okay. And we're not supposed to feel okay. And
So she writes, Sarah Aziza writes, to be a witness is to make contact, to be touched, and to bear the marks of this touch. And as long as Palestinians are alive to record and share their suffering, the duty and dilemma of witness will remain. As we look, we must be aware that our outpouring of emotion has its limits and its own dynamics of power. Grief and anger are appropriate, but we must take care not to veer into solipsism, erasing the primary pain and supplanting it with our own. The world after genocide must not, cannot be the same. The witness is the one who holds the line of reality, identifying and refusing the lie of normalcy. Broken by what we see, we become rupture incarnate.
yeah,
So maybe I'm feeling like a wave of emotion just reading that. So I'm curious, we might just do a little tracking together. And so I'll just share that I'm feeling like a wave of like heat and like tingling kind of rising up. Feels very like grief. So I'm feeling tears. And that's just happening without me trying. And then on purpose, I'm feeling my legs and my feet. On purpose, I'm taking a little bit of a deeper breath. And why I'm doing that is to create a little bit more of a container for this wave of grief to actually move. And now it's kind of settling, and I'm opening my eyes and I'm kind of looking around, looking out the window, noticing where I am in time and space. Yeah, orienting back. Yeah.
thank you.
I'm curious what you noticed or how that's landing for you.
Yeah. Well, when she said rupture incarnate, I thought I thought of two things. One is I thought sometimes we want to be broken open, right? We want our hearts to stay open, and in times of pain, the only way they can stay open is open and broken.
Mhm,
Um, and then I thought about, there's two reasons why, you know, we're not dealing with our grief so we can feel okay, right? And there are two reasons to deal with our grief. And I think you're going to talk about one of them, which is that it allows us to be in action. And the second reason is they don't get us too, right? They're destroying the Gazans. They don't get to destroy every person who cares.
mm,
They get to destroy
mhm,
our ability to be uh, our ability to be okay. In sexual assault, they talk about secondary victims, people who were not assaulted but are impacted by the trauma. And it makes me angry that, as far removed as I am from this, I'm another person being harmed by Israel's genocidal actions. And, there's thousands, if not millions, of people being harmed, even just at the level of witness. And
mhm,
if I can heal, if we can heal, it's it's self-defense against that attack.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm, thanks for sharing that. It's really stark to me how the ability to feel disconnected from something is a often a sign of privilege, right? That even to have the option to not feel it,
Yeah.
um, or to not be impacted. And the truth is, we're all really connected, and this is everybody's issue, not just for people who live there or live in the diaspora or have ancestry there. And, for people who do have that ancestry, and for the Jewish diaspora, it is a whole different experience than me. I don't have any ancestry from that place. So I'm more, I know that like our humanity is connected, right? All of these things happening in the world are connected, right? All of the devastation in so many places, right? In Congo, in Armenia, in India, and Ukraine, there's this big industrial complex, the military, the um, that is so connected to, of course, the government and the economy and all of these things that are driving these are connected. These huge atrocities are connected, and our humanity connects us all to, I guess, like the side of life, like what does life need to keep living? What does life need to keep being protected and nurtured? And so I feel connected in that big way. And I think that as someone who doesn't have ancestry there, it's part of my role as witness is to let myself feel that, let myself be impacted and not just say, "Oh, that's not my problem," or something like that.
Yeah.
Or in my relative safety here in California, right, on a day-to-day basis in the belly of the beast to say,
Mhm.
"Oh, that I'm not gonna look, that's not my problem." And one thing, I've noticed is how deep the ancestral trauma also is from these lineages that are directly involved in this conflict. And so I just want to acknowledge that and what you shared about your family and the Holocaust and all of those. That's a huge momentum of trauma that's also very much present in this conflict. And so just to honor those lives as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I know must be complex.
Yeah, yeah, it is complex. I definitely have people who took a different lesson from our family's experience.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know another thing that you said you were going to share about is different kinds of trauma responses and what might come up um, inside of witnessing and maybe different levels
Yeah.
of witnessing.
Right. Right. And so some of the things I just named are just kind of like different power dynamics or identities that might impact the way we experience things differently. There's so many other things that might impact that, like your own trauma history, um, or health, or different. Our bodies perceive threat through a process called neuroception, which immediately sizes up the level of threat, and we can't reason our way out of it. It's just an instantaneous natural thing that occurs. So maybe if you're a smaller person or a child and you hear a big noise, you might feel really threatened. Or if you're like a grown adult, you might know, oh, that's just like the door slamming. And it's has to do with the size of your body, right? How your system responds. You might be a veteran and hear the door slamming and hear like a bomb going off, and then that impacts how you respond to something. So I just wanted to name that. Like, it's not always our fault. It's never someone's fault how you respond to perceived threat.
Yeah,
And witnessing m- extreme violence, genocide, murder, war on a screen
mhm,
is traumatic. That is something that does cause vicarious trauma, that does cause secondary trauma. That has been studied. It's real. And
makes sense.
so I think that, it really is important for us to care for ourselves and our bodies as witnesses. Um, and it's also important, not because our feelings are more important than other people's, or our bodies are more important than other people's, but because when we take care of ourselves, that gives us the capacity to act, that gives us the capacity to show up for what we really love and want to mobilize around. And I do want to share some that I think, in the mass culture, in the United States where we live, um, people don't really know how to feel their feelings for the most part. You know, like feelings are something to be pushed down. That's why, when I felt
I'm
that.
already embarrassed by how much I'm crying in this interview,
Oh,
and I'm the one who's like, we need to feel our feelings. Come, everybody, come feel feelings together with me. And even in this context, I'm like, oh goodness, that was more crying than I intended, right? So yeah, it's totally there.
please, cry. I'm here for it. I welcome your tears and my own. This is a conversation where we should cry, I think, you know?
Yeah,
And yeah, I that's the reason why I kind of narrated what was happening in me as I was feeling that wave of emotion, because I have been studying basically how to feel feelings for
mhm.
decades. And I want to share that. That's what I help my clients with. It's like, oh, there's a big bad feeling in there. I've been trying all my coping mechanisms not to feel it. And so they come into the session, and I say it's a successful session if they're crying, if they're raging, if they're collapsed in shame and just being with that, like I'm there to help lend my nervous system to the situation so that that person can help move something that might be too big to move alone or too scary to move alone.
Yeah, I have an accountability buddy who a couple of times when I shared how hard this issue has been for me to be with,
Yeah.
she said, it sounds like you need an Alice. like like that I need somebody to hold the space for me that I've been holding for people. And I think that's kind of happening now.
Yeah.
Putting out some of the stuff I've been holding in. I mean, I've been doing some great work and I've gotten some great support, but there's just so much.
It's a lot. And it's a lot of support is needed. And I think that can also be overwhelming. It's like, gosh, I need therapy like every day, you know? Um, and sometimes we do. And sometimes I mean, the need is so great and that can be overwhelming. And so when that overwhelm comes on, one rule I have for myself is like, how do I make it more doable, more bite sized? Um, how can I scale down what's needed just in this moment? So, for example, if I'm scrolling and I'm witnessing some of the violence and atrocities happening in Gaza, you know, feeling is not like doom scrolling, looping in despair, or like lashing out at people online. Those are not examples of like actually feeling feelings. Those I would say are more like trauma responses.
Mm,
Um, and it happens to me a lot. I catch myself doom scrolling in a freeze state often. And so what I would recommend if you're stuck in one of those places, I would say that you might be in a fight, flight, or freeze. And so, how to recognize that is like an example of getting into a fight might be, you know, getting into a rant and posting or messaging or texting and kind of lashing out and taking that aggression out on somebody or a stranger on the internet.
hmm.
And if you're feeling that way, one thing, if you're in the fight mode,
Yeah.
one thing you can do is, and you want to try this?
Okay. Okay.
You can
I'm not
get
in the fight mode yet, but I can probably get there quickly.
like a towel or a blanket,
I've got blankets in my lap. Under
yeah,
the
and
blanket.
just squeeze it. And usually when we feel anger, it starts in the chest and it feels like heat, and it kind of shoots up into the jaw and makes the jaw clench.
Yeah.
And it can. So what I encourage you to do is feel it in your chest, let it
Mhm.
move down through your arms and into your hands, and just crush that blanket. And let yourself growl and show your teeth.
Brr.
Good. Yeah. And then just releasing. Let yourself breathe, letting your jaw open. Oh. And then wiggling your fingers and toes. Yeah.
I just want to say my Jewish grandmother crocheted this blanket in the 1960s.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, what's your
Maybe the
grand
70s. It's synthetic. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was for me or for my sister.
what's your grandmother's name?
Pauline.
Pauline?
Pauline.
Pauline.
Yeah, she died in 1982.
Mm, mm. Yeah. So how do you feel after that?
Yeah. So I wasn't mostly in rage, I'm mostly in sad, but there is an opening like
Mm,
in my chest. There's a lightness, like
yeah,
room for something. Yeah.
right. So that's like chipping off of that little piece off the big boulder, right? It's just like these little things. I gave that practice to a lot of my clients over the holiday season to
Mm.
use with like little frustrations with the family. But the hands and the mouth and the feet are exit routes for stored tension and activation to exit the body. And so I always like to say you can open your mouth and wiggle your fingers and toes to help release some of that stored tension. So you might have a practice, for example, if you feel the impulse to immediately go on like one of those rage um,
Or for me,
rage
it's usually sarcastic, irritated, disdainful rants. I mean, sometimes there's rage too, for sure.
yeah. No, but that's a good point because it can show up kind of as that uh, the rage doesn't isn't always so obvious, right? It can show up more as that, yeah, sarcastic or even like resentment. Can be a form of rage, and so you could try doing that little squeezing practice, and then if you still feel the impulse, go for it. But it might show up with a little bit more space
More
around it,
choice.
more
More
choice. Yeah.
choice. It's not your
Yeah.
body driving you to write something. It's you decide what you're going to write or say or do.
Yeah. Some signs for me that I'm in like a rage vortex is I literally start seeing red and I can't see anything around me. It's like I have blinders on.
Mm,
Um, yeah. So I've gotten a lot less impulsive about posting and messaging um, with doing these somatic practices. Um, Another trauma response that could show up is flight. Like just ignoring it. Like, ooh, I'm going to think about something else. I'm going to go somewhere else. I need to get out of here. I need to get away from this. So that can show up as like a lot of avoidance. It can show up as kind of like really hyper focusing on something else, something totally unconnected from
mm,
what's disturbing you and what's upsetting you. Um, and that can be a way of like fleeing from the source of the pain. And so, yeah, with flight, sometimes what can be helpful is to literally let yourself go on a walk or a run or move, let yourself get away from it.
mm,
Or give yourself permission for like, I'm gonna not look at my phone during these certain hours of the day. I'm gonna let myself have a break. Because the flight is really like the nervous system is saying, I'm overwhelmed. I need to get away from this because I can't function with this much proximity. So what's right distance? How can you give yourself breaks? And I think the trick with the flight is that, how can you come back because of that, love and care for what's happening, because of that kind of, I don't want to say this in a shamey way, but that moral obligation to be in connection and be informed, because the shadow of flight is like you can become really cut off and distance from what you love, from
mhm.
people, from the causes that you care about, but are really painful.
Yeah. And there's need. Need is there. And yeah,
Right.
fleeing doesn't do everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third one I wanted to talk about, of course, is freeze, right?
Yeah.
Which is one of the hardest ones to deal with. Freeze is like an inner collapse, right? It's when your system is basically unable to move. If flight and fight are kind of like, I can't stop, I need to keep racing, keep going.
Hmm.
Freeze is I can't start. I'm stuck in an off position. And so that might look like doom scrolling and like getting stuck on the couch, right? That might look like being unable to speak or move, right? And it also could be a little bit more subtle and more functional freeze, like going through your day, but feeling like a frozenness around your heart and a helplessness.
Yeah. Sometimes I have a sensation of being in a trance.
Mhm.
That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's
For
a world
me,
around me, but it's not, it doesn't feel as real
right,
as what's on my mind.
yeah,
Grief
right,
reaction I've had before.
yeah, yeah. I I have heard people describe freeze as like seeing the world through a pane of glass, or like the world seems different, distant. Um, I've had experiences of like flying out of my body and seeing it from above. So there's different levels of it, but one practice you could have if you're like consuming media on your phone, for example, is just the move from looking at your phone to looking up and out the window.
Mm,
Because freeze says I can't move, so that's a move. That's a small move, but it is a powerful move. If you can just look up and look around the room. Another move might be going from sitting down to standing up and feeling your strong leg muscles. And which can remind you, oh, I have a body, I exist. I exist. And you can also say out loud, I'm Kelsey Maeve. I'm 37 years old. It's Friday, January 12th, 2024, and I am here. You can
Yeah.
say who you are, what the date is, and what your name is, and that can help bring you into the present.
All right, I'm gonna try it. So I'm Alice Leibowitz. I'm 53 years old. It's still January 12th, and it's a Friday, and I'm in Connecticut in my study, which is also my bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just taking a moment to look around the space and just orient to the here and now. How's that?
Hmm.
You notice anything? Just doing that little practice.
A little more, yeah. Yeah, this chipping away thing is really valid because what I'm feeling is like a little more future focused, like a little more capable is actually what that feels like. Like I could do something.
Yes.
I could take an action. Won't be very big
Yes.
necessarily, but I could imagine. Um, yeah,
Right. And that's amazing because as you expand your nervous system capacity, that, gives more room for agency, more room for options. Because being in one of those trauma responses, it really does feel like you're trapped.
yeah,
And so the one reason to learn how to feel your feelings, to learn how to resolve them and work with your nervous system is so that you can have more access to your own agency, which is always powerful. And I feel like we need as many people as possible to have access to agency, right? Um, and to not just be in that collapse helplessness place. And one thing I've also noticed is that, these past, four, I mean, a whole lifetime, but if you just look back at the past 4 years, you might be able to notice certain patterns in your own nervous system when like global mass atrocities occur. Not to compare these events, but to say that like, if you notice, okay, how did I respond when the pandemic was starting? What happened in my nervous system? What did I do? Did I did I like flee? Did I freeze? Did I go into a fight? Did something else happen? What was my response with all of the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020? Like, what did my nervous system do then?
and the police killings, yeah. Hmm.
What happened in October 2023 to my nervous system? And how might they have? So you can kind of witness yourself and see if there's any patterns and anything that needs attention. It's just really, I'm not saying this to shame anyone for your response, but just like, okay, wow, I tend towards this one response. And so then to ask, like, what might I need personally to have the support to actually feel my feelings and to be taking agency and taking action in the ways that I really want to, right? Is there a cognitive dissonance? Is there a mismatch in your actions and your values? And if there is, how much of that has to do with the fact that your just nervous system is overwhelmed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, Kelsey, we've been talking a little over 30 minutes. So, I forgot to ask you, do you have a free gift for people to opt into to get on your email list?
Yes, I do. I have a free 5-day course
Mhm.
called Expand Your Resilience in 5 Days. And it is the first week of my 6-week course, Expanding Resilience. Um, and, each day when you sign up, you'll get an email with a different practice. And so it's exploring different types of practices that can help you grow your nervous system resilience through embodied movement, through somatic practices, which are also body movements but are a little bit more subtle, through guided meditation, journaling prompts, and psychoeducation about the nervous system so you can understand what's happening and feel empowered to make the changes that you want to make.
Amazing. Amazing. Great. And I'll get the link for everybody so that they can stay in the loop with you. Well, this was wonderful. I I know I needed it. I suspect everybody in our audience needed something, some piece of what you provided today. Really great to be with you again, Kelsey,
Yeah, thank you, Alice.
and we get to share in the hope that that the horrors are going to end soon, and we get to we get to be our strongest and play our part.
Yeah, yeah, this is a time to really be connected, to really be supporting each other, to really be alert and awake and engaged with what we're seeing and feeling. And so I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you for that and for everything you shared about your family and your lineage. Just want to bless your work and all the inner and outer work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thanks, Kelsey. How do we stop recording? Ooh, I bet it's up there. Oh, look at that. I've been recording with the cloud.